Good evening, church. It is wonderful to be with you tonight. I trust that you've had a wonderful first week of the new year. Excited to close off tonight with Psalm chapter 15, the last lesson from this beautiful text of David. Let me just read it to us again, for in case you haven't read it before and you haven't really listened to any of these lessons. Let me just go over it with you. David starts the Psalm chapter 15. And by the way, if you got your Bible with you tonight, we're going to read a few verses together that will not be on the video, that you can turn there with me. Psalm chapter 15 verse 1 says, Lord, who may dwell in your sanctuary? Who may live in your holy hill? He whose walk is blameless, and who does what is righteous, who speaks the truth from his heart, and has no slander on his tongue, who does his neighbor no wrong and casts no slur on his fellow man, who despises a vile man but honors those who fear the Lord, who keeps his oath even when it hurts, who lends his money without usury and does not accept a bribe against the innocent. He who does these things will never be shaken. I find that to be a very powerful text, and if it comes from the great David, I'm sure that we can really take some advice from it. David went through great measures to obtain Zion. Then he went through great measures to enthrone Yahweh on Zion. And in the process, he came face to face with the wrath of God's holiness. In Uzzah's death, reaching out, trying to stop the ark from falling, David recognized a holy God, and a God who would go through extreme measures to ensure that he remains holy, and that his space remains holy around him. And from there on, David knew that proximity to God meant careful consideration from our part. Anybody who wants to get close to God needs to be considerate about God's holiness. Not anybody can live on Zion. Not anybody can go pitch a tent on the great mountain in Jerusalem. David says, only those whose walk is blameless, whose talk is holy, who does no evil to his neighbor, and who keeps his promises even when it hurts. That's the type of people that can come live on God's holy hill. And lastly, for today, who is acutely aware of his relationship with money. Who's acutely aware of his relationship with money. Yes, tonight the title of the lesson is Watch Your Money. Now, money is not a pleasant subject to talk about, to preach about, because it's the only God that gets it right to compete with God in our day and age. It is so unfortunate that we recently I baptized somebody last year in January, and he remained in the faith for 1 year. Well, he's probably still in the faith, but he sort of rejected us after 1 year. He made it for 1 year because I challenged him with regards to his commitment when it comes to God's things. And it became very clear. Like, for example, we wanted to take the whole church. It's the new church that we started here in Pietermaritzburg. We wanted to take the whole church away for a weekend to go and study together and just to pray about people that we want to reach out to and things like that. And he said no, he doesn't have any money to go. And which I know for a fact is not the case, because he just got an extra job. He says he doesn't even have like $1. And so I confronted him about that. I said, there are people in our little church that don't earn a quarter of the money that you earn, and they've got kids, and yet they would do whatever they can to go away on that weekend, but you don't want to go. And it really actually came down to this, that he wanted a free ride. You see, Jesus was great, unless it would cost him money. And the moment that I confronted him about this, it revealed to himself and to me that it is indeed the truth, that he really does love money, and for him it's a struggle. It's a God in his life. And so he decided to rather reject the church than reject his love for money. And Jesus warned us about that. In Luke chapter 16 verse 13 to 15, Jesus said, no servant can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. That's essentially what it is. You cannot serve both God and money. The Pharisees who loved money heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. He said to them, "You are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of men, but God knows your hearts. What is highly valued among men is detestable in God's sight." We need to know that Jesus spoke more about money and possessions than about heaven, hell, prayer, and faith. Did you know that? Why? Because money is a powerful God. Very powerful God. It is easy for us to denounce Allah. It's easy for us to think that Buddha is a joke and that Hinduism is a fable. But it is hard for us to admit that money is a God in our lives. And once again, we can talk for days. We can go all kinds of different directions when it comes to talking about money and all the principles related to it. So I'm not going to go into all of that. I just want to focus on the issue that David addresses in this psalm that we're talking about today. And so the title of the lesson, as I said earlier, What's Your Money, is about chapter 15, verse 5a and b, that says, the person who can live on this mountain is a person who lends his money to the poor without interest and who does not accept a bribe against the innocent. Okay? He who lends his money to the poor without interest and who does not accept a bribe against the innocent. Now, David deals with two segments here that we can summarize, I believe, into two questions. How do you give your money? How do you dispense of it? Okay? And how do you get your money? How do you give money and how do you get money? In my study, I really want to get to the heart of the matter. And so this is it. Firstly, people who live on Zion love people more than money. People who live on Zion love people more than money. And that's really the heart of the matter. Let me explain. If you love money more than people, you will charge interest because you are more interested in making a profit than you are to help someone in need. Okay, so when a person comes to you and says, "Look, man, can you borrow me a few bucks?" That person is in need of that money. If you see that as an opportunity to make more money, you're more interested in getting money than you are in actually helping the person that is asking you for help. The second part of the text is quite obvious. If people are more important to you than money, no amount of money will make you testify against the innocent, right? If you prefer people and you love them more over money, you will never testify against an innocent person because you want you would want the best for that innocent person. Now, 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 2 tells us that in the end times, people will be lovers of themselves and they will be lovers of money. As you see society starts to increase in selfishness, you can be sure that they start to increase in their love for money. And that is when the real godless society starts to develop. People who love themselves and money by default excludes loving others. If you love yourself and money more than what you love God and others, you are in serious trouble with God. And we are guilty sometimes. Sometimes we sacrifice our families for the sake of money. And we might say, well, you know what, I'm providing for my family. Yeah, but actually God is the one that does the providing, not you. And He doesn't expect of you to sacrifice your family in the process of working, since your family are more important to Him than your bank balance. Sometimes we compromise our morals for the sake of money, and I'm sure we can talk about many examples like that. Now, each of us will be tested on this matter at some point or another. I think the story that we've spoken about so many times, but I think just elevates once again this truth over and over again, is found in Matthew chapter 19, the story of the rich young ruler. And I just want to read verse 21 to 24. It says, Jesus answered, "If you want to be perfect, go sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me." When the young man heard this, he went away sad because he had great wealth. And then Jesus said to his disciples, "I tell you the truth, it is hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven." It is hard for the rich man because he's become accustomed. He's become cozy with money. He started to see what money can obtain for him in this life. So I just find it interesting because the reason the rich man was rejected was because he was not willing to let go of his money to help the poor. And that's the problem. That's the problem. The problem isn't that he had money. The problem was that he didn't value the lives of humans more than his money. He wasn't willing to give up his money so that the poor could be taken care of. Therefore, he didn't love his neighbor as himself. And so God will put us in positions where we are going to be tested on this, because he wants to see where we stand on this. Go give up your luxury to so the poor can have food. We'll be tested on that. Then go put on a rag and sandals and follow me. That's what he's saying here to him. Okay? Unfortunately, he loved money more. He walked away from Jesus, and he walked away sad. And Jesus was sad because the rich young ruler would never live on Mount Zion. Now, South African society is quite wild. The discrepancy between the wealthy and the poor in our country is huge. We've got mansions in the biggest city in the country, in Johannesburg, and we've got mansions in Cape Town and even in Durban. Massive. And then we've got shacks in massive cities where the poor live, the slums, the locations we call them. And so there's this massive discrepancy between the wealthy and the poor. And we've become so used to the poor that we don't even feel ashamed of our wealth anymore. We've got a young advocate, a new politician that's coming through the ranks, and people are very scared of him. His name is Julius Malema. But, one day he made a very, very powerful observation, which sort of shook me in my boots. He said, the EFF, that's the party that he's the leader of, he says, the EFF will fight until the children of the poor can eat the same food as the dogs of the wealthy. I'm just going to repeat that. So he said, the EFF will fight until the children of the poor can eat the same food as the dogs of the wealthy. And that just struck me so well, because it's true. Some of the wealthiest people in this country, they would buy the most expensive food for their children. Their dog food would cost more than what the average kid out there in the slums eat in a month. And so there's this discrepancy, and I think God wants us to think about that. Not to be political, but he wants us to think about the fact that when we have an abundance, we need to share with those who have less, if we claim to love them. So the text says, he who lends his money to the poor without interest. And I want to just use Nehemiah as an example here. During the time of Nehemiah, as the returned exiles were trying to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, various factors opposed their construction. They had some serious trials that opposed them. At first there was opposition from without, and then there was opposition from within. The opposition from within came as a result of a famine. Okay? We're not sure what this famine was caused by, but we do know that the people were struggling. And then in Nehemiah chapter 5, you're welcome to turn your Bibles there with me. Nehemiah chapter 5 and verse 2 to 5. The text says, some were saying, we and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain. Others were saying, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine. Still others were saying, we have had to borrow money to pay the king's tax on our fields and vineyards. Although we are of the same flesh and blood as our countrymen, and though our sons are as good as theirs, yet we have to subject our sons and daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but we are powerless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others. Now this text tells us that there were three groups complaining about this situation in Jerusalem. The first group had large families but not enough food. The second group had large mortgages but couldn't buy food. The third group complained about large taxes that forced them to mortgage their land and even sell their children as slaves. Well, what was the problem here? How did they end up here? Well, the wealthy Israelites were lending money to the poor Israelites, which, by the way, was against the law. Go read Exodus 22:25, Isaiah 33:15. A Jew was not allowed to lend money to his fellow Israelite and then charge interest. And so this is exactly what happened. You got wealthier Jews. They were saying to the poorer Jews, okay, we'll lend you some money, but you're going to pay back for that. They charged them interest because they were looking at their own interests. And if they couldn't pay, what did they do? They took their property. And if they didn't have property, they took their children as slaves to pay back the money. Wealthy Jews were taking advantage of the situation of poor Jews. Nehemiah chapter 5 verse 6 to 13 says, when I heard their outcry and these charges, I was very angry. This is Nehemiah. I pondered them in my mind and then accused the nobles and officials. I told them, you are exacting interest from your own countrymen. So I called together a large meeting to deal with them and said, as far as possible, we have bought back our Jewish brothers who were sold to the Gentiles. Now you are selling your brothers only for them to be sold back to us? They kept quiet because they could find nothing to say. So I continued, what you are doing is not right. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of our God to avoid the reproach of our Gentile enemies? I and my brothers and my men are also lending the people money and grain, but let the exacting of interest stop. Give back to them immediately their fields, vineyards, olive groves, and houses, and also the interest you are charging them. The 100th part of the money, grain, new wine, and oil. We will give it back, they said, and we will not demand anything more from them. We will do as you say. Then I summoned the priests and made the nobles and officials take an oath to do what they had promised. I also shook out the folds of my robe and said, in this way may God shake out of his house and possessions every man who does not keep his promise. So may such a man be shaken out and be emptied. Nehemiah says to them, you treat your own countrymen like Gentiles? Deuteronomy 23:19 to 20 allows one to lend money at interest to foreigners and aliens and Gentiles, but not to your own people. This is why you will walk hard and far to see a poor Muslim. They support each other's. They hold on to the idea that blood is thicker than water. How can you look from the balcony of your mansion and see how your brother is selling his children as slaves to repay you? How could you do that? And Nehemiah says, give them back all the interest that you have taken. Give it back. Leviticus 25:35 teaches us that it is more important to help your fellow brother than to make it more difficult for him to survive. Do this also because you fear God. Nehemiah says, I've also lent them money, but I didn't charge interest. And thirdly, he says, take an oath, make a promise. Nehemiah shook out his robes with the symbolic intention to show that he will give everything he has to help his poor brother. What's the takeaway here? When we help people, we must do so with the intention of helping them, not to make a profit for ourselves. We must help people with the intention of helping them, not to make a profit for ourselves. Secondly, he who does not accept the bribe against the innocent. And I'd like to use Judas here as an example. Judas Iscariot. People have done interesting things for money, haven't they not? I read about a guy once, his name is Leron McGillner. He faked pancreas cancer. 2 funds were made so that he could raise some funds. He shaved his hair and his eyebrows in order to look like a cancer patient, made a bucket list of what he wanted to have before he died so people would give it to him. And they did, and he never died. And he got caught out. I read about a Chinese student who sold his kidney for an iPad. A Chinese couple sold their baby daughter to buy an iPhone. People will do crazy things to obtain money. You know that bribes are rampant in your country and in our country, especially in the business world. When people want contracts, they will often hand you like sort of under the table gifts. When people want something, whether it is moral or not, they will use money. Why? Because money talks. Most people would sacrifice their morals for money. And this is where Satan will test you. The most powerful tool in Satan's kit to tempt you with and draw you away from God is money. It is so interesting for me that when you read Matthew chapter 28 from verse 12, you pick up all along the betrayal of Jesus, all the way to the cross, everything revolved around money. Did you know how much money was involved in the whole setting up of the cross and the whole keeping silent of the resurrection? Money was there all along. It was Satan using money to get people to lie, to get people to deceive, to get people to Jesus on the cross. Now, if you read Matthew 28 verse 12, it says, when the chief priests had met with the elders and devised a plan, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money, telling them, "You ought to say, his disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were asleep. If this report gets out to the governor, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." And so the soldiers took the money and did as they were instructed, and this story has been widely circulated among the Jews to this very day. Isn't that just interesting? The guards at the tomb were paid to say that Jesus never rose from the dead. And then, of course, when we talk about Judas, it's all about money. Prime example. This is why money is something we've got to be very careful of, because money will make you sell Jesus out. In John chapter 12, verse 4 to 6, we see that Judas loved money. Verse 4 says, "But one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. 'Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages.'" He did not say this because he cared about the poor, okay, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money, he used to help himself with what was put in it. Satan was standing there next to Judas with his toolbox. He realized that Judas was the man for the job. If Satan marched around the 12 disciples and he looks for somebody with a weakness, he's obviously going to go for the one who would love money. That it could have been Peter, it could have been any of the others that were tempted, but the other guys were not lovers of money. That's why Judas was used. Then we go to Matthew 26 and verse 14 to 16. Matthew 26, 14 to 16. "Then one of the 12, one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, 'What are you willing to give me if I hand him over to you?' So they counted out for him 30 silver coins. From then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over." 30 pieces of silver did the trick. Then we go to chapter 27 and we read from verse 1. "Early in the morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people came to the decision to put Jesus to death. They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor. When Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the silver coins to the chief priests and the elders. 'I have sinned,' he said, 'for I have betrayed innocent blood.' 'What is that to us?' they replied. 'That's your responsibility.' So Judas threw the money into the temple and left, and then he went away and hanged himself. The chief priests picked up the coins and said, 'It is against the law to put this into the treasury, since it is blood money.' So they decided to use the money to buy the potter's field as a burial place for foreigners. That is why it has been called the field of blood to this day. Then what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. They took this 30 silver coins, the price set on him by the people of Israel, and they used them to buy the potter's field as the Lord commanded me." It's interesting how Judas would choose money, love money, steal money, then ask for money to betray Jesus, and when he had done the deed, he would throw money away, the same money that this field was bought with. Proverbs 1 verse 18 to 19 says, "The end of all who go after ill-gotten gain is the spread of their own blood. It takes away the lives of those who get it." Wow, doesn't that just ring true when we look at Judas? Proverbs 15:27, "A greedy man brings trouble to his family, but he who hates bribes will live." What's the takeaway? Wealth gained through immoral means is accursed by God, because somewhere along the line it caused hurt for the innocent, and in this case it was Jesus. I want to leave you tonight with a question, very simple question for you. Think deeply about your relationship with money. What will you do for money? How far will you stretch your moral compass for money? Which of God's laws would you be willing to break for money? I pray that you will have a fantastic week. We love you here from South Africa, and I cannot wait to see you soon. Bye-bye.